You travel a long way these days to find a pit headgear, and yet it symbolises something special, a link to our proud industrial past. And there is one man who is synonymous with this Yorkshire landscape, and he is Arthur Scargill. I've been talking to him about his life and career.
And we'll fight for our industry. We'll fight for jobs to be saved.
Worshipped and vilified in equal measure, for nearly 30 years Arthur Scargill was rarely out of the headlines. A lifelong rebel, he was elected president of the NUM in 1981. His biggest challenge came with the 1984 strike, one of the most turbulent periods in British trade union history, when coalfields became battlefields.
To consider repaying those miners' wages they've lost.
The end of the strike in March 1985 effectively saw an end to the coal industry in this country. As honorary life president, Arthur still works for the union today in an office at the miners' headquarters. You have been almost hero worshipped in parts though. Does that sit right with you?
You're striking a chord and you're saying things that they really want to hear, and nobody else is saying it. The response that you get from working men and women is understandable if you can take into account the fact that they are in struggle and they want to be lifted.
Even leading to his own arrest.
I was on the front line at Orgreave. I got arrested. But so did others. But I wasn't sitting in an office doing nothing. I was with them.
1984, Great Britain.
And I've always had one principle right at the forefront of everything I've done. My father said, never lead from the back, lad. Always lead from the front. And never ask people to do what you're not prepared to do.
Born in Worcester near Barnsley in 1938, Arthur took me back to the estate where he spent his formative years. When did you first come here though? Because you weren't born in this street.
No, I was born down in the village, and at the age of about 2, we were moved out of the small cottage to which I was born, which was one up and one down, into a new council house.
People must have thought they were moving into paradise when they moved here, because there'd be bathrooms inside and inside toilets. And
you've got to be joking. It was paradise, all right. I mean, my mother thought it was out of this world. We had 2 bedrooms, we had a living room, we had a kitchen. In terms of what it was compared with where we came from, it was paradise, but there was a hell of a long way to go. All that my mother ever wanted for me, because she was a Christian, was to have a decent job, to try and earn a little money and come to no harm. And that was all she wanted.
Arthur had a strong bond with his mum and his dad. As a boy, he regularly walked the 4.5 miles to his dad's pit, Wombwell, Maine. We're on the very route now that your dad made to work, that 4.5 mile walk every morning.
Absolutely. And of course, my dad used to show me what the countryside was really like.
And you say your dad was a good teacher. Is that because he was able to put it across well?
Of course, he was a superb teacher. He taught me in the environment where we are, so that I was able to see it firsthand. Rabbits, hares, foxes, badgers, hawks. I knew what the countryside was all about. And of course my father was a tremendous reader. He was a master of words. If you learn, you will be able to understand the world in which you live. But more important, you'll be able to do things in a way that can help put it right.
Across the hills of yesterday, our Yorkshire colliery.
Arthur went to work at Woolley Colliery as a teenager. He experienced at first hand the harsh working conditions.
We were met by this bloke with a pork pie hat on. He had a brown suit stained with oil, called him Lomas. He led us across the pit yard and it was raining, down some wooden steps. I thought, it's going towards hell. Down some more steps, I knew we were going to hell, and into what was called a screening plant. And in this screening plant you had to be there to understand what was going on. There were 5 conveyor belts, and on them was coal, and people were standing either side of the belt picking rock out of the coal. At that point I thought, this is Dante's Inferno. I nearly turned and ran, but I didn't. I also learned the meaning of comradeship, the need to get together, the need not to buckle under, and it was important.
Arthur took me to the site of Charleston Colliery, which closed in 1993, and we met Mick Appleyard, an old union colleague. I know that with that stone obelisk there, that's Needles Eye at back of Nostell Priory, isn't it?
That's right. Well, Eighton Colliery were over there,
Yeah.
Nostell Colliery over there, Walton there, and Woolley Colliery over there.
Where you were.
Where I were.
Arthur's pit, yeah,
That's
that
right.
Ridge, that ridge there, that's Woolly Edge, isn't
That's
it?
Woolley Edge.
And Woolly Edge is where you led your first strike.
Woolley Pit, yes.
And how old were you?
17 and a half, and I saw injustice at first hand.
Yeah.
Mine workers who worked on the coal face were allowed a concession. The day before the annual holidays they could come out, provided they completed their task an hour or 2 hours early. But the same concession didn't apply to all the workers in the pit, particularly the young lads. I went into the manager's office. I said, if it applies to mine workers on the coalface, why is it that we can't come out at the same time? And the manager, smoking his pipe, looked at me and says, I can't give you permission to do that. So the 4-man delegation came out and announced to the assembled lads that it said no. And I just said, hang on a minute, he hasn't said no. He's only said he can't give permission.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do is that we're going to come out at the same time as all the other miners. And that's what we did. And the following week, after a week of anxiousness, we didn't have a penny deducted from our wages.
What started as teenage rebellion eventually led Arthur here, the NUM building at Barnsley. Arthur had a strong social conscience from an early age. He joined the Young Communist League at 16, following his father's footsteps, and rose within the ranks of the local union. He was soon elected representative to Yorkshire area meetings. Now, can you remember where you first sat when you came here as a young delegate?
I can indeed.
Yes.
I came in here as a quiet, reserved, gentle young man, and I sat in this seat here.
Yes.
And some people say I created bloody havoc as a result. I remember the first speech I made, I stood up and I said, Mr. Chairman, he said, sit down. And that was the last time I obeyed him. I actually uttered the most fearsome words ever uttered in this chamber in that early period of the 60s. I actually proposed that we take strike action to gain recognition, dignity, proper wages, better conditions. And I couldn't get a second.
Over the next few years, Arthur fought hard for miners' rights and their interests. Often provocative and uncompromising, he was in the thick of things when in 1972 he led flying pickets to the so-called Battle of Saltley Gate Coke Works in Birmingham.
These are the bloody hell drivers we're talking about. This is exactly what's been taking place, but the television cameras haven't been here. We're asking you, get a bloody photograph of this.
A year later he gained respect for his leadership and resolve in being part of the rescue team at the Lofthouse pit disaster.
As far as we're concerned in the union, we shall continue to fight to get 7 men out alive.
In June 1973, Arthur fulfilled his father's dream for his son.
I remember in a discussion down the pit, the men were talking about what their sons or daughters were going to be. Some were going to be accountants, some were going to be lawyers. And they said to my father, what's your lad going to be, do you think, Harold? He says, my lad's going to be president at Yorkshire Miners. And they all laughed. And he said, I'll never forget the day it was announced on television that Arthur Scargill has been elected with the largest majority ever as president of the Yorkshire Miners. And I told my dad that night the victory was his.
It's interesting, you know, you can see what shapes you, because you talk about comradeship and looking after your fellow workers. You talk about not drinking and carousing with the bosses and going to race meetings and football matches. But what you're describing is a class warrior, really.
Absolutely. I'm also describing, I think, what trade union leaders should be. And it's time that the trade union movement stopped mucking about and started taking on the system.
The early 80s, now national president of the NUM, Arthur Scargill continues his fight against national pit closures. At the start of the 1984 strike, he represented nearly 200,000 miners at 170 pits.
The union will continue to do all in its power to win maximum support for the strike.
The strike proved to be a massive trial of strength between the NUM and the government. Orgreave saw some of the most violent clashes between police and striking miners. At the height of the picketing, as many as 10,000 miners faced 8,000 police. I think some of the most memorable footage I've seen of that Orgreave battle was the lads falling down this bank in here trying to get away from police.
Well, they weren't falling down, they were actually jumping down to escape the police dogs that were being set upon them, and to escape the police themselves in full riot gear, with staves, with shields, and of course the lads were escaping from being seriously injured, and down the bank they went, and many of them sustained injuries by jumping down there.
There's a lot of responsibility on you that day as leader of the miners' union. Were you, I mean, you've always been known as leading from the front, but were you frightened on that day?
No, not fear. I think that what happens is that when you're involved in the way that we were involved, what happens is that the adrenaline begins to run, and that you have got to take a lead. You've got to show to people around you that you're prepared to do what you're asking them to do.
On the 30th of May 1984, Arthur was indeed in the middle of events. He was arrested and charged with obstruction. What were you actually doing then when you were leading up to your arrest? Were you just walking down it?
I was just walking down on the pavement with about 4 colleagues towards where the pickets were standing, and of course where the massed ranks of the police were. And suddenly I'm confronted by a chief superintendent and a number of officers, and they said, "Stop, you're not going any further." I said, "I am." I said, "There's nothing to stop me." And basically what he did, he said, "If you attempt to go, we'll arrest you."
His arrest for obstruction led to a court appearance in December 1984. He was found guilty on 2 charges and fined a total of £1,000.
You can rest assured that I'll be doing my job, leading the miners on picket lines, including Orgreave.
Again at Orgreave, Arthur was himself subjected to violence when he was injured in the confrontation.
What happened was the police were charging, almost like the old Roman army, up the hill, with shields, batons, dogs, horses, the whole lot coming up towards people, and hitting people on the back of the head. And I knew that the best way to deal with that was to face them. And if you face them, you had more chance of not being hit. And I turned to say to the lads, "Stand your ground, you've done nothing wrong." And at that moment, the lights went out, the shield hit me on the back of the head, and I was unconscious.
Was there a point in the strike, though, where you thought, "I'll have to give in, it's all over"?
Not once.
Not once?
Not once. Not once. In fact, I was so disappointed when they called the strike off. We were within, literally, if you'll forgive the pun, striking distance of bashing them into the ground. And by the way, even to this day, we didn't lose. The greatest victory in that strike was the struggle itself.
In recent times, Arthur's become interested in tracing his roots and has found links between his family name and a small hamlet called Scargill in North Yorkshire. Scargill boasts a castle.
Came up here to look at it along with my daughter, and she immediately wanted us to take it back into the family.
But if your family wanted to take this castle back, you'd have to speak to this man, because Niall, you're now the owner of Scargill Castle, this lovely old building behind us. How did you come to find it?
It was basically teetering on its very last limits. It was going to fall down.
Yeah.
And just by a sheer quirk of fate, the then owner was happy to sell it at the same time I was getting married, so it became my present to my wife for our wedding.
You talked about how the Scar and the Gill part of your surname came together.
Well, if you look at the name itself, indeed any name, there's a history to it. The Scargills were people who lived in a narrow ravine with the overhanging cliff, and therefore they were known as the Scargills.
But for Arthur, the real legacy, of course, is what happened to the mining communities after the strike. He still fights on behalf of the miners and continues to court controversy.
We'll fight to develop and expand rather than destroy and close down.
Today, the site of Orgreave is almost unrecognisable to what it was.
When you look at this wasteland, it's difficult to understand how much pressure the state applied to close two pits that were in the course of development to supply coal and burn it in clean coal technology to supply Sheffield with heat and power. And at the same time, ironically, the plant that they claimed they wanted to keep open, that's the Orgreave Coke Plant, is also part of the desolation. The villages have gone, the people have gone, and the community no longer exists.
Since its closure in 1993, Charleston Pit near Wakefield has remained dormant, but will become an open cast mine. Former Charleston miner Mick Appleyard suggests this is short-sighted. From 1865 to 1993, this was a coal mining community with all the muck that comes with that as well.
Yeah.
But now it's the bit's closed. They're going to start all over again.
Yeah, they didn't want us coal, but now they want it open casting, giving all the muck, the grief of what this lot does for people in a community what's already been devastated.
Yeah. A pit can't reopen once the land around it's been opened.
Oh no, it can't reopen in this pit site. No, there's no way that can happen. I mean, it'd flood. The stratas are all cracked and everything. It'd just flood, wouldn't it?
Because there'll be a big hole here when they start.
That's
open
right.
casting.
Yeah, deep hole. Yeah.
Another closed former pit is Barnsley, Maine, where, like at many other pits, there's still lots of coal reserves. This pit, there is some talks about turning it into a museum, which, I mean, in many ways, that is the final death of the coal industry, that one of the last dead gears is about to be turned into a museum when it's still standing on a lot of coal.
When you destroy a community, when you destroy jobs, when you destroy factories or pits, you create a problem.
Yeah.
You create within the community a sense of helplessness and hopelessness amongst young people. Now compare that with the young men that used to go and work in the pits, and during those periods we had a community that was not only lawful and stable, but one that was not a drug culture or a crime culture area. What you get with unemployment, what you get with deprivation, is the kind of problem that we're all now having to face.
And to the future, Arthur still relishes opportunity for public debate. One encounter was about where future power might come from. Arthur, a strong advocate for coal still being viable, was pitted against a nuclear physicist who suggested a different, cleaner solution.
It's what I just happened to have with me tonight. It said a piece of plutonium, and it was hermetically sealed. He said this piece of plutonium is extremely powerful. He said this plutonium is safe. He says, I've also brought a piece of coal. and he put a pair of white gloves on dramatically. And he took from a box a piece of wet coal. And he said, now Mr. Scargill, we have you, put your future energy demands in this material called coal. The choice is yours, you know. He said, you can either put your faith and your trust in my safe, clean and easy to handle piece of plutonium, or Mr. Scargill's difficult and dirty piece of coal. And I said, can I say that when I worked down the pit in Yorkshire, I used to suffer from a condition known as acidity. The only way I could cure acidity was to suck a piece of coal. So I'll tell you what I'm prepared to do. I said, I'm prepared tonight to eat that dirty, obnoxious piece of coal, provided the professor will eat that safe, clean piece of plutonium. And his appetite disappeared in an instant. And the audience roared, and I won the vote hands down.
As he approaches his 70th birthday, the political and physical landscape of Arthur's Yorkshire has changed beyond recognition, but he stays true to his beliefs. That's the thing with you. You've always known which side you're on, haven't you?
I've never crossed a picket line in my life, and never will.
Yeah.
To me, it's the 11th commandment, and I'll always respect that. When I look back, I'm proud of what I did. Yeah. I'm proud of the role that I played. And when people begin to write the real history of our nation, it's those who fought back who will be the real heroes. Standing up for my fellow men and women is the most important thing in my life.